Hey everybody, it's Roger, creator of the Azure Sandbox, and we're picking up where we left off here with VNet Shared. Just doing a quick code walkthrough of some of the different automation that we built for VNet Shared. So the first piece of code we want to look at is bootstrap.sh. So I'm going to just pop over to VS Code, expand VNet Shared, and open up bootstrap.sh. So let's start down here on line, let's say one, here we go, the main, line 88 is where the main routine starts. So the first thing that this code does is kind of collect some information about the current environment. Here we go out and we get the default subscription ID. So we're using that same AZ account list command that you were used to, but we're passing it a query. And that query says, just give me the ID of the subscription that is the default subscription, and then output that as a TSV file. And you could go run these commands right from the command line to see how they work. So I'll copy that and we'll go down here in our terminal and we'll run it. There's our default subscription ID. So that's the value that gets pumped into this environment variable, which is local to the script. I do a little error checking on that. If it comes back blank, then I throw an error. Next, what I do is I'm assuming that the user is currently signed in and has done an AZ login. And I go and I get the Java Web Token or the JWT token, this access token, for the currently logged in user. And then I extract the object ID from that token, and I store it in this environment variable. So if we just take this code here, if you remember during our prereqs, we were installing a bunch of Python libraries and stuff. That's why we had to do it, is so that we could run these commands. Okay, I think this is it. Let's run this from the command line. That should give me the object ID for my user account. Boom. Okay, so that's a very, it's a lot of code. It's kind of complex, but it's very reliable because you're looking at a credential that you already have because you've already logged in. We don't have to round trip to get that or do any fancy Azure Active Directory calls. Here's where we go and get the default Azure Active Directory tenant ID. So if I copy that and run that, there's our tenant ID. So it's a nice way of debugging. You can run these commands kind of interactively and then put them in your script. So I initialize up a bunch of constants and a bunch of defaults, and then I go get a bunch of data from the user. So that's what's happening here in this section, 128 through 144. Then this code from 147 to 165 just basically handles the case where you provide a blank value. It just resets it to the default. I go and make sure that an ARM client ID was provided, that an ARM client secret environment variable was set up. I throw errors if either of those things don't exist because I need those for my service principal. And then I go here and I validate that my service principal is valid. Okay? If it's not, I throw an error. Next, I go check my subscription, make sure it's valid. If it's not, I throw an error. Finally, I make sure that I'm signed in and that my owner object ID has a value. Otherwise, I throw an error. Here we check the location. I used EastUS. If you run this account here, or this command here, this will give you the location ID for the current location East US. Okay, so if I would have to put that constant in from the command line, so I'm not going to run that one. If it's a bad location, I throw an error. So you try to, do as much validation as you can up front. Here's where I check that skip admin password gen input. The reason for that is these scripts are idempotent. You can run them over and over again. So if you're going to run Bootstrap a second time, you don't want to regenerate your admin password because you want to keep the original one. So that's the reason for that prompt. Here's the code where we bootstrap the resource group. So again, for idempotency, I get the name of the resource group. I try to find an ID for that resource group. If I find an ID, that means the resource group exists. If it doesn't, then I go create it. So this is how you do, kind of some poor man's idempotency in Bash. Okay, so here's my command for creating my resource group. There's 4 parameters: subscription name, location, and our tags. Next, I do the same type of thing for the key vault. I go and look and see if the key vault already exists. If it doesn't, then I create it. Okay. Once it's created, I grab the ID because that's useful for creating access policies. You need the ID. Here's where I create my access policies. These, I just overwrite them if they exist. That works fine. So this is the one for the currently logged in user, and this is the access policy for the service principal. Then I set up some secrets. This first one is for the admin username. Here's where I generate my strong password, and the routine for that is up at the beginning of this code. And I tried to write a routine that would work with all the different strong password requirements for the various Azure services that are utilized in the sandbox. Guaranteed one will crop up where it doesn't like the strong password I generated at some point. That'll be a bug I'll have to fix. Each service tends to have different strong password requirements, so I tried to middle of the road it. So here's where we set that up and store it in Key Vault. Next, I'm going to, create my storage account if it doesn't exist. And I grab the ID and the key for the storage account. And then I set up some secrets in Key Vault for that key. I also create a Kerberos key for the storage account, and I save that in Key Vault. That'll be used later to domain join and Azure Files share. Finally, the last thing I do is I'll create a container that we'll use to upload scripts in other configurations. So we don't do any uploading to it now, but we're just putting it in place for other configurations that are going to need it. I just quick build some JSON with my tags, and then I write out my terraform.tfrs file. So the way I do that is with printf commands, and this first one with a single right arrow overwrites terraform.tfrs if it already exists, and then these other ones with 2 right arrows append to it. And then I cat it out at the end, and that's it for Bootstrap. So we'll do a separate video for some of the other stuff. Let's have a look at the docs, see if I forgot to tell you anything about Bootstrap. Permission model, the secrets, the access policies, the storage account, the TFRs file, idempotency. Yeah, I think we've covered Bootstrap pretty well. So I'll see you in the next video where we'll do our next code walkthrough.